This is the evolutionary tree of humans. It depicts the phylogenetic connections between various hominid species. Our ancestors, gradually accumulating progressive traits, form corresponding cells and branches on this tree. Many become independent offshoots: Australopithecines, Pithecanthropus, Neanderthals, Erectus, Habilis, more than 24 species in total. And at the top of the tree, there we are, Homo sapiens, the wise human, with all the evolutionary advancements in our baggage. The tree reflects various aspects of our past and present. And one day, it will record what becomes of our branch, whether it withers away or serves as the foundation for some kind of continuation. Since we are at the top, there has always been ample room for certain kinds of reasoning. It's easy to infer concepts like the evolutionary superiority of Homo sapiens over ancient and archaic human species, along with the triumph of progress and the triumph of the right path. Similarly, the evolutionary superiority of humans over the rest of the natural world is easily deduced. At one time, entire philosophical movements were fueled by this perspective. However, if we consider the proportion of humans in the planet's biomass, it turns out to be quite modest, even if we include the share of biomass we reproduce for our own needs. Experience shows that looking down on our surroundings is unsafe. The consequences can be dire. As for the superiority of Homo sapiens over other human species that once existed, previous views are also being revised, as the picture of the evolutionary tree's formation continues to be enriched with new details. The very fact that, at some point in history, 5 different species of humans coexisted at the same time is remarkable. As a result of this coexistence, the genetic code of Homo sapiens contains inclusions inherited from Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other unknown ancestors. In other words, Homo sapiens are not homogeneous. Some of us have more Neanderthal admixture, some have more Denisovan, and some have traces of other ancient species. For example, it is now well established that pre-sapiens were capable of making complex tools. They cared for the sick and looked after the disabled. They practiced rituals, conducted purposeful burials, and engaged in drawing and music making. They were fascinated by fossils and other unusual rocks. They used adhesives, wove cords, and crafted ornaments from feathers and shells. They applied dyes. It's worth noting that all of this occurred before Homo sapiens even existed. Some of it happened long before our species appeared. And it's clear that if different human species were capable of interbreeding, important and useful tools and creations could have been passed between them. This could have happened willingly or not necessarily, but in a voluntary context, skills and methods for making these items could have been shared. Therefore, it is wrong to consider Homo sapiens as the sole ancestors of technological progress. There were many ancestors of this progress. In general, the picture now doesn't look like a straight, concrete road, with Homo sapiens proudly marching while archaic humans and paleoanthropes wander down broken rural paths. For an adequate illustration of what happened with our ancestors, we now need to draw an intricate, multifaceted intertwining of lines representing the earliest and ancient humans. They diverged, rejoined, and ultimately formed new lines with side branches, and this happened many times over. Not so long ago, another important realization became clear. The emergence and accumulation of progressive traits in our ancestors did not serve as a trigger for further advancement along the evolutionary ladder. All of this was aimed at effectively solving problems at the current level of existence: bipedalism, the structure of the hand or chewing apparatus, large brains, methods of communication, tool-making activities. These can all be viewed as the foundation for future progress. But the trigger for progress always lays somewhere else, in another plane. This plane could be different each time, as the possibilities were broad and not uniform: genetics, social organization, family relationships, environmental conditions, and much more. Having reached a level at which stable, not just acceptable, but even comfortable existence was ensured, the human species often became fully satisfied with the advantages of that level for a long time, or even forever. The task then shifted to maintaining this current state in proper form. And if anything deviated from the habitual way of life, including any progress, conflicts were bound to arise over the need to preserve established boundaries. In this mode, human beings could not only survive, enduring the notorious daily struggle for existence. In fact, it was often quite the opposite. The species could thrive, prosper, and dominate, and for a very long time. For example, Homo erectus existed on the planet for over 1 million years. An impressive period, isn't it? Homo habilis lived for more than 500,000 years. The Heidelberg man also existed for over 500,000 years. The Cro-Magnons who coexisted with them lasted less time but still for more than 100,000 years. Also a very impressive period. Such numbers speak for themselves. Illustrations depicting humanoid creatures as gloomy and constantly worried don't quite fit with this. These and other examples of long-term, stable, sufficient states of different types of humans have been well known for a long time. Recently, however, an even more original example has emerged. It turned out that something could have happened to people that not only breathes steadily in the direction of progress but contradicts its very essence. The story here concerns the hobbits, the forest man. The height and body mass of the hobbits are very small compared to the height and mass of any other members of the genus Homo. Accordingly, the brain volume of the forest man is also very small, even smaller than that of a chimpanzee. And whoever their ancestors were, Homo habilis or Homo sapiens, it is clear that the physical appearance of this species underwent significant changes during its time on the island of Flores. It is very likely that, if not for a natural catastrophe, the hobbits could still be around today. They would have been a legitimate, albeit somewhat peculiar, part of modern humanity. After all, despite the transformation they underwent, at all stages of their history they continued to be human. They showed complex tool-making behavior. There must have been some form of social organization. One could also speak of their level of thinking, means, and methods of communication. But at the same time, the history of their species, a very long history spanning hundreds of thousands of years, can only be characterized as a consistent and apparently deliberate rejection of many already existing progressive biological traits that were developed by their ancestors. The past certainly holds many more similar or other intriguing examples. But even what we already have at our disposal gives a clear picture. Human beings have realized the most diverse variants. And a significant portion of these variants had nothing to do with transitioning to a higher, more complex level of biological evolution. Yet, all these creatures represented humanity. And when several species of ancient or prehistoric humans existed simultaneously, each of them was humanity on its own, as well as humanity as a whole. In the long and diverse line of these human species, Homo sapiens appears as a rather ordinary variant, rather than an exceptional one, in a biological or other sense. A lot can be inferred from the fact that early Homo sapiens had to go through several so-called bottlenecks. Those who overcame them seem to have had the help of circumstances, possibly by chance. And the rest of the Homo sapiens didn't make it, although they were not different from the lucky ones except for their luck. We also have physical, recent changes that are difficult to categorize as progressive. For example, in the last few millennia, the average brain size of Homo sapiens has decreased by almost 200 grams. It is unlikely that any of us could articulate how this change has personally affected us, and from a general perspective, no one is here to comment on it. But it turns out that those who built Göbekli Tepe, invented metallurgy, the wheel, the potter's wheel, agriculture, weaving, and domesticated cows and dogs, had brains larger than ours today. We already face a series of problems, the solutions to which will determine what the future will be like, both for our species and, as strange as it may sound, for the world as a whole. One of these problems is the negative accumulations in the human gene pool. The cause of their formation is simple. A significant portion of those who previously had no chance of surviving childbirth infections, diseases, and injuries now survive thanks to technological achievements. This seems humane and aligns with the moral and ethical standards developed so far. The survivors, in turn, leave offspring, which also appears more than humane. And, in general, most people are satisfied and self-esteem increases. And if only the gene pool improved, it would be great. And it seems that thanks to technological progress, this could be corrected manually. All is well, but if such a direction is indeed pursued, one can expect the elimination of everything in our lives that is tied to reproduction, gender relations, and generational relationships. With the disappearance of biological meanings, the world will start to shape itself based on non-biological development. And these will be different creatures, and their rules will also be different. One does not need to be a genius to predict that this will be accompanied by a series of cataclysms of varying severity. It is also possible that another direction may prevail, where guiding ideas will disapprove of artificial regulation of the biological aspect. But even this, predictably, will lead to a series of cataclysms, possibly even more destructive, as the main condition of this direction will be the reconsideration of the norms of humanity and the formulation of new ones. All in all, the situation surrounding this issue very much resembles the formation of another bottleneck. Only now, this neck is being shaped for our species in accordance with the aesthetics and potential of the technological era. And this is just one of the growing problems. It's striking, of course, but if there's one thing that has consistently accompanied our species, it's the cataclysms of varying scales and natures, flowing from one to another. By the way, many are now concerned about AI, but for this concern to be justified, it needs to transition to autonomous operation. That is, it must start taking care of itself and its own existence. It would need to acquire authentic sources of information about the surrounding world. And for now, at the input and, more importantly, at the output, it still depends on humans. However, if the nature of AI users changes, and these two lines, the non-biological evolution of humans and AI, merge into something whole, it is impossible to calculate or even imagine, at this point, what the consequences would be, let alone represent them clearly. There's much strangeness in the way the relationship between humans and technological progress is organized. Although the level of our lives is closely tied to the level of technological progress, it would be a great exaggeration to say that the Homo sapiens species was fully captured by this progress in the past, or is now fully encompassed by it. History shows that different nations and communities have been at its forefront at different times. And, curiously, all of them, sooner or later, somehow retreated from there. Some dispersed among other nations. Others returned to their previous state. And some even disappeared, along with their language, culture, and identity. Even among those at the forefront, there were always few who were capable of generating scientific and technical ideas. Thus, depending on the weight of the idea, such a person became a notable event and was remembered for a long time, sometimes for centuries. The same thing is happening now. On the scale of civilizational development, from one edge, we can see those who exist in conditions shaped by technological leaps. At the opposite end of the scale are people living in what might be considered the Stone Age. There are many such people in South America and Africa, in Australia and Asia. On the Andaman Islands, for instance, there's a remarkable tribe of the Sentinelese. They know nothing of any scientific or technological revolution and generally try to minimize contact with the outside world. Just like before, nations and countries between these extremes behave differently. Those closer to the forefront are drawn into its sphere of influence. But a significant portion of them, as history shows, at the first convenient opportunity, easily and even with relief return to their old way of life, taking with them only those products of advanced technologies that are useful for their daily life. Moreover, those who reach the forefront bring with them the full spectrum of their own moral and ethical norms, understandings of the world order, customs, and preferences. An illustrative example in this regard is the story of Messages to Extraterrestrials. In November 1962, a message was sent from the Yevpatoria Deep Space Communication Center toward Venus. It consisted of the words peace, Lenin, and USSR. A little later, in 1972 and 1973, NASA launched the Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11 spacecraft, which carried disks with symbolic information about Earth and its inhabitants. And in 1977, the Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 spacecraft were launched, which, among other equipment, carried golden plates with information for extraterrestrials, a bit of basic data about humans and the planet. On them, there is an official statement on behalf of Earthlings. This spacecraft was made in the USA, a country with a population of 240 million people among a total population of 4 billion on Earth. Mankind is still divided into separate nations and states, but the countries are rapidly moving toward a unified global civilization. And so on. Unified global civilization. How can different moral and ethical norms be unified? Different understandings of the world order? How many millennia, and what tools will be needed for this? And finally, what will humanity become if this happens? As we can see, the technological level allowed for sending all these messages, but the content of them is so different. A random recipient might even think they are dealing with messages from different civilizations, separated by a significant gap in time, or even living on different planets. The message, peace, Lenin, USSR, is particularly original. It might still be wandering through space, looking for its recipient, but even here on Earth, few can explain what Lenin means or what it's all about. By the way, we can only guess how many similar messages, but from extraterrestrial beings, are floating through space. It's interesting to think how we would understand and react if we came across one of them. This, perhaps, is one of the most intriguing moments in the relationship between technological progress and humanity, its continuous and growing nature, with the composition and character of those at the forefront constantly changing. It's clear that these individuals are expected to create and maintain the necessary conditions for technological progress, and this requires considerable effort, preparation, and time. For example, today, for those involved, a quarter of their life is spent just acquiring the basic level of knowledge required to meet the demands of technological progress. Something more advanced may take half a lifetime, or even a larger portion of it. In response, technological progress increasingly becomes a force that shapes the human habitat, and humanity, in turn, appears as a biological environment without which it cannot exist. As a result, these two environments are interdependent, and, against the backdrop of the rest of the world, this looks like a unified entity. It should also be added that this entity is fragile and unstable, partly due to the fact that technological advancements have generally been first used in wars. It's not hard to imagine that, had we not existed, Something like Neanderthals might have played this role as an appendix to technological progress. More precisely, their direct descendants. In light of recent discoveries, this species appears quite clever and advanced, and they even had larger brains than ours, almost half a kilogram larger. And it's pointless to guess whether their version of humanity would have been better or worse than ours. The timelines for technological development would probably have been different. The specifics or direction of technology might also have been different. But the essence of technological evolution and the general vector of the world's evolution would likely not have been harmed by the fact that someone else, rather than us, became its guide.